So we looked in the Massachusetts case of Cruz about how there has to be a finding by the judge that there is in fact a conspiracy involving all the people whose statements we're attempting to use against one another in order to bring those statements in as co-conspirator statements under 801 D2E. So the Bourjaily case, and it's a fairly famous case as evidence cases go, asks the question of whether we can look to the statements themselves as evidence that there was, in fact, a conspiracy. So, as we know, as a preliminary matter, a judge can typically always look at even inadmissible evidence to decide what sort of evidence will be admissible. But the question of whether we can look at these statements to determine whether there was a conspiracy so we can admit these statements, somehow might seem kind of circular. And the defendant slash petitioner in the U.S. Supreme Court in this case, Bourjaily, makes even an additional argument. He says, look, if hearsay is regarded as untrustworthy, then why would you look at this untrustworthy stuff to try to decide whether there was a conspiracy so that then you can admit this stuff that you said was untrustworthy? So the statements themselves, why would it be that statements that are otherwise hearsay, unless there's a conspiracy, why would we look at these untrustworthy things, determine there's a conspiracy, and then let these untrustworthy things in? So it seems a bit circular. But the court here, former Chief Justice Rehnquist, says, well, no, we're looking at, as we would any 104 question, we are looking at all the available evidence to determine a preliminary question of admissibility under 104. And in those circumstances, we're not just using admissible evidence. Now, Rehnquist says we don't have to face the question of whether we look to the statements alone to find the existence of a conspiracy that will then allow us to admit the otherwise inadmissible hearsay statements. But those otherwise inadmissible hearsay statements can be considered in addition to other evidence to determine that there is in fact a conspiracy that involves other people, that involves all the people against whom you're trying to admit these statements, and then you can admit those statements. So you can in fact look to the hearsay statements that are inadmissible unless there's a conspiracy. You can look at those statements to determine that there was a conspiracy along with other evidence. You have to have something else other than the statements themselves. And then you can come back and admit those statements once you have shown that there is a conspiracy. Oftentimes when people describe the Bourjaily case, they'll use the word bootstrapping, that you use the statements themselves to find a conspiracy to then let in the very statements that were otherwise suspect. The suspect statements then somehow prove something, and then the statements come in. The term bootstrapping is often used by people who attack this type of use of the statements. But know that Bourjaily absolutely allows the statements themselves to be part of the proof that shows a conspiracy that then allows the statements of the co-conspirators made. Remember the two requirements from 801 D2E, which are that the statements must be made in furtherance of the conspiracy and must be made during the conspiracy. And the in furtherance stuff we'll talk about in subsequent videos.